Good morning, everyone. Happy Earth Day. My name is Stephen Janessi. I'm a conservation technician with Cook County Soil and Water Conservation District. We were asked to come here today and talk a little bit about the connection between water quality and land use. So I want to start with a rhetorical question. I'm hoping that everyone will answer this question in the same way in their head. And that question is water quality important? Now, hopefully you said a resounding yes. But I want to throw some really basic figures at you to kind of hammer this point home. So, of course, many of us know that our bodies, each one of us, our human body is about 60% water. On top of that, the Earth's surface is about 70%. But of that 70%, there's only between 0.5% and 1% that's actually available for human use. So if you can imagine the world's water supply is just 100 liters, about 26 gallons, the amount of usable water within that 26 gallons is roughly 1/2 of a teaspoon. Okay? And then we have, of course, you've heard about global climate change. That's impacting the world's water cycle. It influences precipitation patterns, it reduces snowpack, it increases drought. All of this stresses that water supply, especially our groundwater supplies, because it changes when this fresh water is available to us. And sometimes we wind up drawing down our groundwater more than we should, which can decrease water quality. Also, on top of that, we have all of these various industries and practices that we do to keep our world moving, keeping our modern economy moving. And despite all of the environmental protection that we have, over the last 30 years, we've actually seen a slight decline in the water quality of these freshwater supplies. And so I ask again, is water quality important? And yes, the answer is yes, it's critically important. In fact, there are many experts who predict that by the end of this century, water will be the most expensive resource on planet Earth because of its absolute vitality to our lives, the lives of everything around us, and the fact that we have this diminishing available supply. So I want to talk just briefly before we get into water quality and land use about who the Soil and Water Conservation District is. We are a local government unit. We were founded through Minnesota state statute. And our mission is to improve water quality in Cook County by fostering responsible land use and by controlling soil erosion and non-point source pollution. We're not a regulatory agency. We don't go out there and enforce laws. We're here as a resource for folks here in Cook County who might be having issues on their private land that affect soil quality or water quality. We work with local municipalities like the city of Grand Marais when they're having issues around erosion, coastal issues, stormwater issues, those sorts of things. And we do this whole range of services that you can see up on the screen here. Many of them free of charge. We also go out and chase grant dollars so that we can put projects on the ground. And I'm going to give you some example of those projects as well today. These projects really help us to make sound decisions about how we're using the land and ultimately how we're impacting the water. So again, we're going to talk about preserving water quality in Cook County, and we're going to do that through its relation to land use. So why are we talking about water quality and land use together? Well, worldwide, 80% of the pollution that we find in our water comes from the land. So when you're talking about a watershed, that land that surrounds our body with water, everything that we do on that land ultimately influences the quality of that water. At the Conservation District, we do a whole number of programs in order to make sure that the quality of the water in Cook County is good. We're very fortunate here in Cook County that we have excellent water quality. And all those figures that I told you earlier about how precious fresh water is around the world really places an incredible responsibility on our shoulders as landowners, as residents, as visitors, as people who are working in Cook County to try to preserve these resources that we have here in the area as much as possible because they are so precious. So we do a lot of water monitoring throughout the county, in our inland lakes, in our streams, in Lake Superior. We do this both ourselves in coordination with lake associations and a whole host of volunteers here in the county. And we're looking at a number of things in terms of the monitoring that we're doing. So there are certain what are called parameters that you can look at when you're doing water monitoring that will give you a sense of the quality of the water. So these are just a few of them. These are the ones that we monitor for on an annual basis that we've been monitoring for many years. And some volunteers like those lake associations in the county have been doing it for even longer. So we look at things like total phosphorus, chlorophyll A. We use Secchi discs that are a tool we can use to measure the clarity of the water. And we also look at temperature. And the reason that we're doing each of these is really all focused around the physical conditions of the water, and then also the amount of nutrients that are going into the water. So things like phosphorus is a nutrient that can control the activity of algae and aquatic plants in a body of water. And what happens is with a body of water, as it begins to get warmer and as it begins to get more nutrients in it, these algae and these aquatic plants can really go out of control in terms of their growth. That can suck all of the oxygen out of the water in the lake. It can also actually make the lake less transparent, which means less light can filter through all the different layers of the lake. And if you have a deep water lake, it can be very difficult for light to penetrate and get down to where various forms of light might use it. And eventually your lake goes into a state where it's essentially dead and the water quality is degraded. So very important to monitor this data. Very important to do it over a very long time span. Some of the lake associations that work here in Cook County have been monitoring for over 30 years. So we have these really beautiful, robust data sets that tell us what's going on in terms of the amount of phosphorus, the amount of chlorophyll, the temperature, the clarity of the water over long time spans. We also submit all of this data to the state, and it's used to inform decisions about what's happening on the land in the county. Again, so we're looking at that connection between the land and between the water. These are a few of the sites that we're doing this year in terms of inland lakes, just in terms of one program. So we're working with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency right now over something that's called SWAG monitoring. It's called the Surface Water and Assessment Grant Program. And this is basically a cycle that comes up every 10 years where we go out and we get funds to do monitoring at targeted lakes within the area. And then all of the data that we pull out of that will go into what's called a RAPS program, which is basically looking at what sort of land use parameters we could put into the county in order to preserve the quality of the water. It gives us a sense of where the trends are moving on 10-year cycles. And then it helps the state to make some land use decisions along the way. As part of that program, we're also doing a number of stream monitoring sites. You can see those on the map here. And then in addition to that, we also have other grant programs where we're going out and doing monitoring. So this is an example of one that we have been doing for, I think, close to 20 years now, where we have 5 sites just off the coast in Grand Marais, where we're collecting long-term data about what's going on in Lake Superior itself, which this is a huge resource for us when we're talking about global climate. We don't have a strong understanding of, from a science perspective, how the lake will be impacted by global climate change long-term. And also, because it's such a large body of water, it creates its own weather. So how that ultimately affects us as residents here in the county. So having a long-term data set like this is really helpful to us in terms of getting an understanding of what's happening in the lake. This is an example of what some of the data looks like that we pull out of these programs. So what you're looking at here is a couple of trend lines. One of these is for Devil Track Lake, and then one is for Clearwater Lake back on the Gunflint Trail. And you can see all these little dots here are different data points from observations when folks went out and did monitoring. And we're looking across a long time scale here. So with the Devil Track Lake set, we're looking at roughly 20 years of data, a little bit more actually for Clearwater Lake. And so what we can do is we can take all these different observations that occur and start to look at long-term trends when we have a robust data set like that. And you can see we have a trend line, that's that blue line on both sides here. And then the shaded area around it is the confidence interval. So that's the degree to which we're confident in the observations that we're making. And what these data is telling us in this case is that Devil Track actually has a slight declining trend in terms of its clarity overall, whereas Clearwater is actually staying relatively stable. So good news in one, bad news in another, but having the data allows us to make good decisions. And a lot of times, our lakes are generally very, very high quality in terms of water. And a lot of times when we do see declining trends like this, it's very much related to that land use again. So Devil Track Lake has seen a lot of development over the last 50 years. And so that's why we are likely seeing some of these changes in water clarity. This is just another way that the data is presented. We get it in a lot of different formats. This one is looking at something that's called the Trophic State Index, which again goes back to water quality and just kind of gives you a sense of what these long-term trends might be. This is again for Clearwater Lake. And all of this data is also available to the public. And there's actually quite a few ways you can access it. You can use what's called the Minnesota DNR Lake Finder. If you Google that, you can get water quality data for any lake in the state of Minnesota. You can get the surface water data that we're doing as part of the SWAG program through the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And then R&B Environmental Labs is somebody that we work with to process all of our water samples. So they maintain what's called a lakes monitoring database, which is another place where you can get some long-term data. So what does the data tell us in terms of what we've been seeing since we've been running these programs? It's a lot of good news, actually. Most of the water bodies in Cook County are doing quite well. We have really high quality water in our lakes and streams, low nutrients, cold waters. Honestly, this is one of the reasons why people come from all over the world to recreate here, because this is the quality of water. We do have some lakes and streams where we're seeing some stress, and oftentimes, again, that's around those highly developed areas that we have county where development is extremely concentrated. This is again just kind of giving you a sense of what's going well. One of the reasons we have such high quality water is because of the amount of forested land that we have here in the county. The state has a general goal of within any watershed trying to keep 75% of the area forested. 91% of the land here in Cook County is public, so we've got a huge advantage in that way. Natural buffers are extremely important. Having these areas of vegetation directly adjacent to the shoreline that provide a barrier between whatever's running off of the land and the lake itself to create some natural filtration. Our landowners have been great partners in maintaining those. And then also we have been working, and Cook County Land Services has been working for a number of years to update septic here in the county, because those can be a huge driver of water quality as well. In terms of concerns, erosion is always a concern with some of these changing precipitation patterns that we're seeing, where we don't get precipitation for long periods of time, and then we get a ton of precipitation all at once. Erosion can become even more of a concern, so we want to keep an eye on that. We are seeing more demand on our water resources. We've got more folks coming into the county and building. Anytime that happens, you're gonna be drawing more on those water resources than you have in the past. Forest management is a concern. We know that our forests are going through a lot of change right now, both through natural processes and through climate change. And so figuring out the right balance of where and when to harvest and how to keep those forests healthy is really important for the long-term water quality goals. And then shoreline wetland management in those developing corridors is of critical importance. So I just want to quickly run through some of the conservation projects that we do as an organization that help to preserve water quality. And this will be a bunch of before and after photos. This is a project that we did here in the county, where you can see on the left-hand side, we've got an extremely eroded bank here. The bank is at a slope angle that's not sustainable, so it will continue to collapse if it's at that extreme angle. We want more of a gently sloping bank along any kind of a stream waterway. And this is likely being caused by something that's happening upstream of here that's causing the water to come through this area of the stream at a very high velocity and just cut away at that bank continuously. So for this project, we came in, we adjusted the slope on that bank that you can see on the left side of the after picture, did some plantings in those areas. Plantings are a huge part of the work that we did some in-channel stream work as well, and made that more of a meandering stream, more of what you would see under natural conditions where land use is maybe not influencing the way that that water is moving through that particular section of the stream. This is a smaller restoration that we did that I'm just going to walk you through very quickly, kind of step by step, so you can get an idea of how these projects work. So the first picture that you see here on the left is before we did anything, and it's very similar to the last one that we saw. We've got an eroding bank here that's at a very steep angle. You can see the water quality within the stream itself doesn't look particularly good. And so we worked with a Minnesota Conservation Corps to come in and do some work here. And the first thing that we did is at the bottom of the bank, we tried to create what's called a toe. This is an area where some of that eroding sediment has a place to fall where it goes directly into the water. And we use what's called a coir line, which is essentially like a rolled coconut fiber to create that toe. So we hammered that in first. And then from there, we started working up the bank. We put in what's called an erosion control blanket, basically, again, some natural fibers that we can stake into the slope itself and then plant into that. It holds some of those plantings in place. It holds that soil that's eroding in place. And then once we got that blanket in, we started doing some plantings. And after about 5 days, this is what we had. And then as a district, we go out and inspect periodically for these projects. So the slide on the left is about a month or two after we had completed the project. And then on the right is just 1 year later. So you can already see the kind of progress made in a very short period of time. We're already seeing a lot of that vegetation coming in that's going to hold that soil in place. Some other types of projects that we do, stormwater management is really critical, especially within our more highly developed areas like the city of Grand Marais. So we will install things like rain gardens, and then we'll also install things like the equipment that you see here on the right, which is part of the stormwater system. Basically, what you've got is some underground basins here that allow that sediment to fall out before waters wind up in Lake Superior. This is another good example of a stormwater project that we did recently. This is the stormwater pond over at the campground in the city of Grand Marais. So it wasn't really behaving particularly well, and it collects a lot of stormwater from the city. Basically, that whole 8th Avenue West area and a couple of the surrounding blocks there, as well as up the hill when you get up towards up yonder at WTIP. All of that water is flowing down into this system, and it wasn't behaving well. It was discharging a lot of sediment into the harbor as a result. And so we altered the design of the basin and put in a double basin design so that we had 2 spots for sediment to fall out. And then also, you might be able to see there's a metal sort of structure almost in the center of the picture that also allows sediment to fall out of that water before it empties out into a creek that's on the other side of a rock structure that's just above that metal structure, and then flows out towards the lake. So just slowing that water down, giving it time for all of that sediment and those particles to filter out before it lands in there. We do a lot of shoreline stabilization projects. Okay. These are really important. They both help to control erosion. They also help to filter the water that's running off of the land. We do gully stabilization projects for the same reason. Low water crossings are really common in some of our rural areas where people can only access their land by crossing a stream. So we'll do some hardening of the entrances there so that every time they're crossing that stream, they're not kicking up a bunch of sediment and sending that down the waterway. Culverts are pretty important. So we get a lot of funding to work on culverts. Culverts often, when they get installed the first time, either the sizing's not quite right or the placement's not quite right. That can cause a whole host of problems. And with that, that gives you a sense of how we're influencing what's happening on the land to ultimately protect water quality. So, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to.
A lot of properties where the trees are cut down and by the tree down for the lane. Is that, do you guys enforce or? People don't do the trees, how permanent.
Yeah, it's a good point. So, as I said at the very beginning of the talk, so we're not an enforcement agency. So we won't go out and enforce any kind of tree harvest that folks are doing along the shoreline on their property. However, shoreline buffers are pretty critical importance. We do get some money to do projects to reestablish shoreline buffers. And so what we try to do is we try to get out to landowners' properties as much as possible. We do a lot of what's called technical assistance along Lake Superior. And we really talk to people about the critical importance of maintaining those trees when we can, because it takes a long time to grow a tree. And then if they have, mowed all the way down to the lake, oftentimes they're going to see problems on their property with erosion. They'll call us. And then we have opportunities to go out and do what's called a critical area plan, where we can revegetate that area. It's really important as a landowner to maintain that vegetative buffer, not just for the erosion concerns and the water quality concerns, but also for your home and your property. It provides you with a barrier between yourself and those big weather events that come rolling in off the here. We try to. So the enforcement arm in Cook County is Land Services. And it really depends on what sort of local regulations, state regulations are in place around vegetative buffers. And those can get quite complex. I don't know if I want to get into all the details of that right now. I'm not really the expert to speak of those, but because we're talking about private lands with the work that we do, folks do have some flexibility in terms of how they maintain the shorelines. They do have to keep some vegetative buffer there, but they also have a right to their sightlines to the lake. And so we just really try to work to provide people with the best advice we can about how best to accomplish that and still maintain all of the issues that we're talking about. Yeah.
Got some friends who harvest sand on forestry properties that are scheduled now to be perfect. Is there any mitigation to that or anything to do? Not that.
That's probably a question more for the DNR or the Forest Service. I didn't really be able to pull out that. Any other questions?
I was curious, are you expanding your ability to do things? Are you getting enough money from the legislature to do the things that you need to do and the other funding that you seek through grants?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. So for our history, the Conservation District has been almost 100% grant funded, which makes our work challenging at times because we have to go out and find these grants particularly run on short cycles. So maybe we're talking like 2 years, 4 years, something like that. And our work is 100% guided by what grants we have at the time, which makes it difficult for us to kind of set big picture priorities for the organization. Ultimately, we have to do the work that we're paid to do by the state. We did recently get from the legislature some permanent funding. It's a relatively small piece for our overall budget, but it was a game changer for us, quite frankly. It allowed us to hire some more people and increase our capacity. But we are in continued conversation with the legislature about can we both maintain that level of funding because it's scheduled to come down again now in about a year or so. And it potentially even increases because it does allow us to make a lot more planful decisions about the work we're doing in the county if we know that we have a stable source of money, which has not traditionally been the case. We're pretty clever when it comes to going out and finding money to do this work, but that is kind of the challenge, and it takes up some of our time, which means we're spending less time out on the land, doing all the good work that we do. Yeah.
Does every county have a water conservation?
So nearly, there's 87 soil and water conservation districts in the state. There are a few areas within the state that have what are called watershed districts. And so they don't have a conservation district. And the watershed districts have a little bit more enforcement responsibility we do, so that's kind of like that in that program. And manage things like that.